you've been hearing about agentic AI. There's going to be agents everywhere, and they're all looking for you. They want to sell you stuff and convince you of stuff. How are you going to defend yourself? How are you going to deal with this? If you think that you're like pestered now, it's going to be more pestered, okay? So what you need to do is you need to have your own AI that represents you. I mean, really represents you, not somebody else. It's like a lawyer or a doctor, sort of represents your interests and helps you, fend off what's happening, keep you on the straight and narrow, make your life better. And it's for you. It is, in the legal term, it's a fiduciary. It legally represents your interests and nobody else's. So let's hear a little bit about that. I'm going to ask everybody to give their sort of elevator pitch, and let's go. John.
John Sviokla from IIA Insights. Pleasure to be here with this esteemed panel and my friend Sandy. I think this issue of own your own intelligence is something that everybody needs to pay attention to for the following reason. If you think about the history of digitization, when we digitized the world, we created three new forms of capital. Traditional capitalism was built on natural capital, financial capital, and human capital. As we put digital in, we created behavioral capital, network capital, and cognitive capital. What we've done is we've fundamentally traded our behavioral capital to folks like Meta and Google, our network capital to folks like Facebook and LinkedIn, in exchange for cheap goods and services. And it is a critical mistake as an individual or a corporation to trade your cognitive capital, which is higher up in the stack in terms of value, in exchange for cheap goods and services. And that is a fundamental thing that we as individuals, as corporations, and as communities need to understand. The second thing I'll put out there is that when we think of the creation of cognitive capital, we all draw from a common good. We all draw from language, we draw from history, we draw from culture. And the creation of value always begins in the gift culture, as the president of MIT was up here saying, how much value does MIT create for society? So that we have to think of what are the public goods in the area of owning your own intelligence. So those are the two things I'd like to start off with.
Okay, so when I hear that, I hear also a speech that Xi Jinping gave, head of China, where he said—
I stole it from him. No. Okay.
Yeah, there used to be, land as capital, money, human labor capital, and now he says data as capital. So
absolutely.
The person who's all about the dialectic between capital and labor now says it's a three-way battle, and you better be in the mix. Ben.
Let me intervene here and pull it back up to agentic AI, because that's the mega trend that we're all talking about now. I think of agentic AI as intelligence that takes action for you. And that can take lots of different forms. So let's talk about what that might look like from a consumer's perspective. Hey Siri, book me the cheapest flight to Zurich. Okay, we can imagine that. That's coming, that's already here. Hey Siri, help me save some money on my car insurance. Okay, you can kind of see it. Maybe it's coming. Hey Siri, help me contest this surprise medical bill. Maybe that's a bit further out. But this is the promise of agentic AI or agentic intelligence for consumers. If we can nail this, consumers are going to have more agency, they're going to have more power in the marketplace. You, with a strong intelligence that serves your interests, you're going to be able to research better, you're going to be able to transact and buy better, you're going to be able to troubleshoot better. So that's the real promise if we can get agentic AI to work well for consumers. The trick is, how do we know that those agents that we will rely on, that will take action for us, actually serve our interests? How will we know that? How will we know that they're loyal to us instead of to a counterparty? So when I say, hey Siri, book me the cheapest flight to Zurich, how do I know that Siri's not getting a kickback from Expedia? When I say, hey Siri, help me save money on car insurance, how do I know that Siri's not going straight to Geico? I mean, these are just kind of examples to kind of illustrate this bigger normative challenge that we're going to have, but we have to nail it. And if we do, consumers are going to have a lot more power in the marketplace. So I'm excited to be working with people at MIT and Stanford to try to set out some of those norms, to build the technologies that we need for consumers to know that an agent is loyal to them, to keep those agents accountable, and also hopefully to build a best-in-class agent that we can offer as a consumer protection organization, a consumer champion, if you will. So really excited about owning intelligence, but also the idea that you can turn to a trusted fiduciary or a trusted agent that can represent you with intelligence you can trust.
Great. So it's worth mentioning or reinforcing that he's building these things as part of Consumer Reports, which is a not-for-profit, which helps you make better decisions. And previously you were at Mozilla, and we're working with Mozilla. And so you get the picture, right? There's this sort of movement of people know how to build stuff, and we're going to build stuff for you. So that's the idea. Crystal.
Yeah, as a journalist in the room, it requires me to keep a balance of skepticism and optimism about the technology agent. That's the thing I think we have been promised this year. We'll get agents that are actually usable and it's gonna change our life in some shapes or form. So I think it's important for us to try and adapt to technology, but it's also important to emphasize the importance of AI literacy in the age of agent. Like people need to understand this technology doesn't always work 100% well, and a lot of people are still trying to work on the transparency and the observability in the process of using agent, because we do want to see, the magic answer when you put it in a prompt, but we also want to potentially get a chain of thoughts when you ask the agent to perform certain tasks, so you can still be in the loop and being able to see how course correct and how to make certain decisions. So I think a lot of companies are trying to develop that capability. I think in general, LLM to a lot of people are still kind of a black box approach, but for consumers to adopt technology, they need to understand how it works. Like sometimes the technology hallucinates, and when it comes to different steps, the room of error may actually increase, and that may, depends on the stake and task that you're dealing with. The stakes might be different. So I think we should put more emphasis helping people understand how agents actually work, and then in the step-by-step, maybe there is more product development to be done there as well.
Yeah, I think when we deploy technology, we often forget that the biggest cost is people learning how to use it and what to trust and what not to trust. It's not the actual software development. So that's great. Keith.
The problem with following so many smart people is you take the things I was going to say, but that's okay.
But you can
I'm going to
reinforce
pivot.
it. Come on.
Yeah. No, listen. So I agree with John that you have to protect your cognitive capital, and I agree with Ben that there are now existential questions of whether you can trust what's coming. Of course, this is true with search engines, right? It's not a new problem, right? When you get a search and it's a paid search result, or you ask a question of an LLM, and that question is kind of leaning in a certain political direction, and if now it'll be, is your agent so these are not new issues, right? They're just coming through different interfaces. But I also think we're thinking way too small. And I spent most of the last few years helping countries understand the economic imperative behind infrastructure and sovereign AI. And I think of things at kind of a national and global level. So if you think about agents, I don't think you should be, the context or the construct should not be one person, one agent. We're thinking of it like it's this singular, intimate relationship. You have to think about agentic AI, which is a bit of a hyped up term, but you have to think of it as a completely new scalable way of consuming AI, right? So now take that idea and apply it to a country. I had lunch yesterday with a minister of a small country, about 5 million people, and he was thinking, well, how are we going to get, and their GDP is about 40 billion. He says, well, how are we going to go from 40 billion to 100 billion without doubling their population, right? Well, if you only have 5 million residents, but you're world class in AI, potentially you could have 500 million agents working on your behalf within your country. There's no limit, essentially, except data centers, computing, and energy. Those are real constraints, but just running with it theoretically, you can quadruple the productive output of your country with this kind of methodology. If you think about each of those agents having an average human intelligence. Now, instead of having just 5 million people, you have 50 million or a billion agents working on behalf of your country. So I think we just have to think much bigger as far as the context. I know that also amplifies the risk, so I get that. But I just think we're almost framing this up as a pretty narrow consumer problem. It's a much bigger galactic opportunity.
I think that's a really important point, is that treating people as individuals is always a mistake. You need to think of them in the context of their community. Sometimes it's larger things like countries. Sometimes it's your local neighborhood or your workplace or something like that. But it's that power of people coming together that can be amplified by AI that's going to make the rock and roll really happen. So that's great. And AMD is building this stuff because you're head of AI.
Well,
AI
the
there?
infrastructure that powers it, right?
Okay, so we're going to buy your stuff. Okay, got it. Ramesh.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandy. So I run a group called Decentralized AI at MIT. And we understand AI. We're trying to understand, all of us, agent-based AI that has a notion of reasoning, planning, thinking, and memory. But what comes after agent AI? Because agent-based AIs work in an environment, as we just heard, where all the agents trust every other agent, which means they're some part of a consortium. But decentralized AI is when these agents are across disconnected, disinterested, and distrusting entities. The way we work, pretty much. I'm glad you used the analogy of nations and citizens. We're able to work across these entities where we may not trust each other, but we know that if we work together, it'll get better together. So the promise of decentralized AI is agentic AI, where agents are in distrusting and disparate entities. And the two reasons why it's really fueling decentralized AI is, one is the notion of edge AI that we just heard, where we might be able to train many of these models locally, sometimes even without access to the internet. And the second is that some of these models could become so small, they will fit on edge devices. And the output of that is, we might be able to run AI across data silos, but maybe the most important aspect is that we can create an economy of internet-based agents, AI agents. So what is it? Just like we have digital labor, and we have a notion of how much money is worth particular amount of labor, the digital labor that's conducted by these agents, whether it's data, whether it's compute, whether it's intelligence, there's going to be an economy of that, and decentralized AI is potentially going to unlock the trillions of dollars of economy of this digital labor.
There we have the sort of pictures of things. Now we're going to see, what is the sort of reaction? What do you think? And how can we get these people involved in helping out?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a learning process. It's a combination of organizational and human capability interacting with the agents. And I think that there's some great work done by Boston Consulting Group, the guy who founded it, Bruce Henderson, many years ago, building on some stuff from the 1940s that documented this phenomenon they called the learning curve. And what it was a combination of scale economies of absorption of cost, more units through the same fixed cost, as well as a fixed factor of how much cheaper each unit of production was as you doubled the volume. And it started with aircraft manufacturing. So just think of that. So basically, you're making stuff cheaper because of capital efficiency, but also a learning effect. To this issue, there's going to be a massive learning effect. And we think that, in our group, there are going to be this notion of intelligence leveragers. So if doing the work is the arithmetic and AI is the algebra, intelligence leveragers are the calculus, the speed of change. And that is a combination of an organizational and a technological thing, and that will be very hard to catch. The practical implication of this is you need to start learning and implementing now, because catching someone who's constantly running faster is very, very difficult. And the scale economies of knowledge are not clear at all. The scale economies of search are super clear. Bigger's better. The scale economies of knowledge actually have nooks and crannies and interactions and social interaction. And so those organizations, those countries, and about 4 or 5 million people would be a great unit of analysis to do it on, are going to move at a rate of the calculus, not the arithmetic. And we haven't seen that before in commerce.
So that's a really good point, is that, and it sort of echoes this, the main cost is in educating people and having habits of the people to adapt to this faster and faster and more powerful world. So as Consumer Reports, you want people not to make stupid decisions, right? But it's going to get more and more complicated.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
The empirical evidence on the intelligence leveragers, every single $1 trillion or above capital company is an intelligence leverager. They're using AI to build AI. And they are pulling away from the rest of the market.
Well, just to kind of return to this notion of owning your own intelligence, we are going to see an explosion of intelligence of different kinds and for different purposes. We want to have intelligence broadly distributed and for different purposes. And so we don't want unipolar or monolithic intelligences. Some of what gives you that intelligence is compute, and there's like a really healthy discussion about how we ensure that there's also local AI. That's something that we might touch on at the sidelines here, but it's really exciting to see what's happening with small models that can run on devices that can enable people to have private and local compute. Some of it has to do with the data that is not only used to train an intelligence, but also to augment an intelligence. And what are the applications that we pull together for different purposes? So going to your nooks and crannies, there's a fractal of things that society needs where pockets of specialized intelligence are going to lead to better outcomes. I focus on consumer, and I do worry that if you look at the investment in agentic AI right now, very heavy in e-commerce and places that matter to consumers, where is the commensurate kind of counterbalancing investment in intelligence that advances the consumer, that's not motivated, that's not trying to win a commercial transaction? So, if we think of marketplaces, if we want marketplaces to continue to function effectively, we need a counterbalance to the intelligence of the supplier, right, or the sell side, right? So who is the advocate or the sense maker or the liaison? And you can pick your noun, but I think if you want consumers to have agency, we need agents that are purpose-built and highly intelligent to advance the interests of consumers.
So Crystal, tell us about it.
Yeah, on the macro level, I've been spending the past few days asking Fortune 500 companies what impact they're seeing when they deploy agents in their companies. And the one very major impact is when their business double or triple, they don't need to hire more sales agents or customer service agent. So there is a big kind of a job, kind of how this change the job market, and maybe will make business more efficient, and the people already seeing margin expansion. But maybe the same types of jobs that was there before, maybe they don't need it as well when deploy the agent. And then on the personal level, I think learning how to use the agent or interact with agent kind of requires a constant update to understand where the skill is needed and how to talk to those systems. Because you remember when ChatGPT first came out, the hottest AI course is about prompt engineering. And everyone thinks that's the most important thing. But now because we have better AI systems and better product, maybe that's less important nowadays.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's in economist language and in sort of labor and so forth, is really worrisome that you don't need more people for many things, right? So how are people going to get educated to stay up so their skills are relevant to it? And what happens as productivity happens? Are the number of jobs go down? What does that do to society? And that's a huge sort of question, yeah. Keith.
It's so much more interesting when people get up here and they debate and argue with each other, but we're shockingly aligned, which is disappointing. So going back to what you said, and John, I just want to reframe a point that I've been making for about 3-4 years, which is that AI changes the calculus of global competition. You articulated it brilliantly with sort of those different layers, right? It is true, and small countries, and I've worked with a lot of small countries across, well, I've worked small and big countries, but small countries are punching above their weight. And you're going to see the geopolitical map is being rewritten based on not just strategies. Every 70, 80 countries have AI strategies, but the countries that are executing and investing and scaling in both the human and compute infrastructure, they will get the dividends. The $10 trillion or $15 trillion, whatever it is, the global sort of economic sort of benefit of AI will not be evenly distributed. Right? It won't be evenly distributed at the country level, at the company level, at the community level, or the individual level, right? Obviously you'll have winners and losers, but clearly those that understand those layers, John, will make a difference. And you can see those early winners already. It's not done. There's plenty of room, but and the nooks and crannies you referred to, right? AI isn't one thing, right? You can be a small country that leads in healthcare AI, but not industrial AI, right? There's other ways to play that out. But AI literacy is one of the great levelers of that. If you don't understand it, everyone's not an engineer. I'm not an engineer. You don't need to be a STEM student to understand how to capitalize on this technology. So basic AI literacy is going to be the leveler, the great foundation of success across the world.
Yeah, one thing that, and you see it here to some degree, but except maybe for Crystal, is that a lot of our conversations are US and EU centric. But I actually, working with a lot of little countries, I see that the Indo-Pacific is the hot place. You're going to see not general sort of frontier models, but things that really work for logistics, for health, for this, for that. And there's going to be perhaps one of the dominant players in this sort of evolution. and people aren't talking about it unless you happen to be from there.
Yeah, I mean, don't underestimate Vietnam. Don't underestimate Serbia. There's a lot of small countries around the world that are leaning in because it's existential to the future of their economy. This is the only chance they have to leapfrog.
Yeah, I mean, I like the saying of the head of Abu Dhabi, the Sheikh, which is, data is the new oil. When he says it, it means something very different than when somebody in Europe says it. But so the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, they're leaders. They're leaders as much as anybody, and they're in the fastest growing region. So pay attention. Ramesh.
This whole notion that some folks will have an unfair advantage, and there's a risk associated with that is true. At the same time, let's also look at some of the positives. If we have the digital labor with productivity, there are many sectors of our economy that are very low margin businesses. Some of the most important sectors like health and water and so on are, you don't see $1 trillion valuation companies in those sectors, although education are some of the most important sectors for unleashing human potential, and so those low margin businesses will prosper. The unit economics of those businesses, even if you believe a productivity gain, a factor of only 2, suddenly all these businesses will have sufficient margins, which means a lot of investment will pour in, a lot of talent will pour in. And on the positive side, I feel like sectors like health and water and education and so on will see tremendous gain. So I think if you can solve decentralized AI, which is the reason why these sectors don't make a lot of money, is because there's friction, usually a data friction. And if you can eliminate the friction between data and intelligence, many of the sectors that are part of sustainable development goals will see a lot of prosperity. So I'm excited about decentralized AI, bringing good for the world.
So that's really interesting. So one of the things I'm heavily involved in, and through a sovereign wealth fund, is investing in the digital economy. So as all these things begin to happen, everything becomes digitized, everything becomes tokenized, everything becomes much more liquid. And that means that a lot of the small guys can punch as large as the big guys.
Absolutely.
That changes the economy tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, what's a lot of people don't realize, if you go back in the history of industrial capitalism, when Henry Ford did his thing, he got the assembly line from grain and from meat packers and so forth. But he partnered up with Frederick Taylor, who created scientific management, which basically took the knowledge out of the guilds and put it into the organization. Right? And why is all this stuff so cheap and such high quality? It's because of scientific management. It's a knowledge management system that is fundamentally a bureaucratic system. This is a network active system that can live anywhere. So you can pick up a couple of points of margin in water management. And as you add intelligence to anything, it generally gets higher quality and more efficient in a fundamental way. Less capital, substitution of information for assets and so forth. And the other really, really important thing is, if you think about education, and I absolutely agree with the AI literacy thing, how did education begin? So it was all tutoring, right? Alexander the Great was tutored by Socrates. Then the Prussians lose to Napoleon. They invent the Prussian system. The world adopts the Prussian system for industrial capitalism, the 1 to 30 system. A tutoring system tutors kids 2 standard deviations better than a 1 to 30 system. So if you want to know how you're going to survive in this world, we have to turn to the robots, and we have to invent the social system around that so that we can go back to Socrates at scale with new capabilities so we can compete in that world.
Can I add to that too? Just speaking on the economic generativity of owning your own intelligence. It's not just the tutoring, it's also the notion that you can now instruct a computer to write code.
Absolutely.
So the barrier to creating a new product or service, in theory, is much lower. We should be figuring out how to leverage the fact that natural language is now the biggest programming language. And that will lead to a lot of new businesses, a lot of cooperative organizations, a lot of growth of different kinds.
Yeah, one thing I'm slightly optimistic that the gains from this AI wave could potentially go more shared by the world in more equitable ways, because the kind of open source culture in this development AI technology, like how it started with all the scientists across different labs and universities work together and pulling their resources together. And now I feel like that might be a little bit gap of what the industry is doing because the amount of resources that's required, but you still see pretty strong open source efforts that enable the smaller countries we talked about or specific industries to make use of the technology.
I just want to thank John for Socrates at scale. That's my new favorite statement. Thank you, John.
One last word.
No, I'm Ben. I'm really glad you're here because I think eventually it's not about AI. It's about humans. It's about unleashing human potential, and finally we'll have a way to have a level playing field where anybody, no matter where they are, can contribute, participate, benefit, and be part of a community. So I think that's the hope for this decentralized data.
So let's make that future happen. Focus on improving the people so that they can improve the world. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.